At the time, I think it was understandable.
Okay, good, hopefully.
So one of the questions that comes up is the pilot manual, we don't have a whole lot of information about the solver. So that is where our recent JGR paper, as Matt mentioned several times, we actually looked, we have the information about the different preconditioners and examples of how many iterations it took for a problem with 3 faults. We showed the scaling for the different solvers. And the pilot manual does mention using the multi-grid combined with our custom preconditioner. And in terms of running in parallel, that is right now our sort of best, most robust set of solver parameters. And I think if we have time, we'll run and point you to the examples. There's in the 3D TET4, rather than hex 8, that's the TET4 directory. We have examples of using the field split with the custom preconditioner. And step 02 is just the field split, step 02 is just the algebraic multigrid. Step 04 adds the fault with the custom preconditioner. And so we can look and we can show you what that looks like. And in the running in parallel session, we'll talk a little bit about the scaling and how these things are affected when you start running larger and larger problems. And all these solver.cfg files, what Matt showed corresponds to pilot version 2.0 when we're actually naming fields. So when he had displacement in his solver settings and Lagrange multiplier in his solver settings, in version 1.9, the displacement is field 0, Lagrange multiplier is field 1. I've uploaded the .cfg files to the website, and so you can download those, and we're going to work on having them available in the pilot distribution for the upcoming, for any future releases, and we'll name them appropriately to help you guide you along with a README on when to use them, and we'll add them, a discussion of them to the manual.
Yes, and I guess I would point out, just in a more specific response to Young's question, is that there is a pretty extensive PETSI manual, and the solvers and preconditioners, with the only exception of the fault preconditioner, are exactly what's in PETSI. So there is a lot of discussion in the PETSI manual about what these do, and so that carries over exactly to pilot. And what you'll find is the problem is that all of the behavior is very problem specific. It would be great if it wasn't, but it is. And so really the only solution is to run a bunch of trials and do this kind of analysis on what you get. Look at the number of iterates, look at how it's scaling, and try the different variants. And we can try and help you with that. You can mail this list, and we will do our best to help you. I think the takeaway should be that it is very, very easy to try different things. If you were in a position where you just had to choose a solver and code it up, it would be rough, because it's impossible to choose based on analytics what will work the best for a given problem. So is there any? Because I'm more than willing to consider, questions about specific problems or stuff like that. If there aren't any, that's okay. Feel free. Sometimes it's hard to think of these when you're not running. So feel free to mail those kind of questions to CIG Short if you can't think of them right now, or if it's hard to describe the situation you're in. If you mail a question to there, it would be really helpful to have the SNES view and the log summary in your mail, that output, so that we can see exactly what solver you were using, and the what the iterates did and what the performance was. So. Now let me turn off the sharing.
Matt, do you want to run the field split with the multi-grid and 3D TEP4? Or
Sure.
do you want me to go ahead?
I could do it. I mean, if you feel like doing it, go ahead. I guess you would be running 1.9, which might be better for them, but I can run it.
Works.
Well, actually, my version works. I solved all of the 2.0 problems on the plane.
So let's see. So we're going to go to 3D 4. So let's look at step 02. It's a tetrahedral mesh. We're just going to do simple shear. So one of the new things here is that this is a demonstration of refinement uniform. So in order to refine our mesh uniformly by a factor of 2, all we have to do is include a single line. And our boundary conditions are very similar to what we've been seeing in our 3D hex 8. Our output is just BTK output. And then here's our PETSI setting. So we're going to do a little bit different. Here's our split fields, and we're switching the matrix type. So the default in Pilot is using a symmetric block AIJ matrix. And so with a symmetric Jacobian, we can reduce the amount of storage. As soon as we want to go to field split and algebraic multigrid, we can lose our symmetry, and so we have to change the matrix type to AIJ. So we'll take a little more storage, but we can generally run a lot faster. And so in this case, this particular problem, I don't have a fault. I'm just doing simple shear. And so I want to use field split and use ML on field 0, preconditioning only. We don't need this because we're only split into one field, but that'll come in when we add the faults. So I'm going to run Carlos step 02.cfg. And so let's get a wider view here. Scroll up. So this problem took 10 iterations. And you'll notice if I scroll down here, we can look at the number. So you can see that we have multi-grid levels. There's 2. I think we'll get the full matrix information. So 10 iterations with 3,890 unknowns. So pretty good. If I go back and step 01 is the same problem using ASM without the refinement. And so we were 10 iterations in our previous case. Now we only have 546 unknowns, and that was taking 24 iterations. So in a problem that's essentially 8 times larger, I was able to converge in half the number of iterations. So that's giving you an idea of how things scale. In our JGR paper, we show that with weak scaling, we can cut down from hundreds of iterations, like 250 iterations, down to 50 iterations using the algebraic multigrid. Now, step 04. Now we are adding a fault with the uniform refinement. So this is the simple shear fault dislocation. I think this is the equivalent of step 03. In this case, we're also doing the global refinement. And I'll scroll down here to the bottom. Now we're doing very similar to what Matt was showing. We're doing field split. We're going to use our custom strength preconditioner. Again, the matrix AIJ type. And now here we're going to do the field split. We're going to do multiplicative for the combination. We found that multiplicative gives much better performance than the additive combination. And on the elasticity part, we're going to use the algebraic multigrid approach with ML. And then on the Lagrange multiplier portion, we're just going to use Jacobi. Only do preconditioning only, and step 04. So now this is the same size of problem as step 02 that took 10 iterations, but now we're adding the fault. So we're adding the saddle point. And so when I scroll up here, we're going to go from 10 iterations to 38 iterations due to the fact that we have the saddle point. So that just shows that the elasticity is pretty easy to solve with the algebraic multigrid, but then with the fault with the saddle point, this has prescribed slip, so it's still just a linear problem. Even with our custom constraint, it's taking nearly 4 times as many iterations. But it's still doing much better than the additive Schwartz approach preconditioning. So this is I would say is our most robust set of solver settings for running in parallel and running large problems. And it scales, it's mainly the algebraic multigrid setup is the piece that is not scaling particularly well. The solver, the rest of the solver is scaling quite well. So do we have any other questions? Either on solvers or running Pilot in general?
Brad? With that
Yes.
1.9, can you scroll down to the end here? Just want to see something.
What do you want to see?
I want to see at the very end to see if there were unused options. That real diagonal option shouldn't work with the new PETZ. Yeah. Okay. FSPC field split real diagonal, the name changed to FSPC use AMAT. And you can see that in the solver configuration files that I uploaded. It doesn't make that big of a difference here, but some stuff will fail if you don't have that in there. The non-sure stuff will not do the right thing. Yeah, so.
So we need to update PC. It's going to still be PC field split.
No, not field split. Just PC use AMAT. It's not part of. That's why the name changed. They hoisted it up because it applies to several preconditioners now. This strategy, so they took it out of field split and made it something general. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so we were at 38 iterations. Let's see if we do any better.
I think it should be for this problem. It's probably similar, but for some problems it's a big deal.
I think it might have improved things a bit. Oh, same.
Yeah, so it's for this thing you have the preconditioner and the thing are not different as far as the diagonal goes, but it can be, and that's why we had to put that in. Remember, it was failing on some problems.
Yeah, so that is a good catch. So we'll be updating all of our .cfg files to update, to remove the sub-PC factor shift type. So we have about 20 minutes here. The other two sessions on the fault friction and running in parallel may be pretty full. So this is, a really good opportunity if you have general questions about sort of how you want to use PyLeth in your research, how to get started. If you're starting to think about that and feel like you're maybe stuck, now is a great opportunity for you to get feedback on this or other issues. Do people want to see more examples? Would you ready to go home for the day? More troubleshooting? Anyone want to speak up on what they'd like to see for 20 minutes?
So on the parallel session, Brad, you're going to talk about the mechanics of running it and evaluating, for a given machine how the performance is looking? Is that right?
I'll talk a little bit about performance. I think we can turn it over to you in terms of looking at some logs to see.
Okay.
Where
yeah.
we can bring up the logs from our solver test to see, so you can walk through some of that information, or we can even pull up the paper and you can walk through some of the performance issues.
Yeah, I think if people are interested, the problem is always that, parallel machines are very different. A 32-node cluster, it behaves very differently from a 500-node cluster, behaves very differently from a Cray, behaves very differently from a Blue Gene. And so the problem is that what I've talked about as far as algorithmic scaling, getting fixed numbers of iterates and stuff like that, that's pretty machine independent. But the runtime is extremely machine dependent. And in fact, was part of the PETSI motivation, is that solvers you want to use on one machine can be drastically different from the solvers you want to use on another machine. And it doesn't really have to do with your problem so much as the architecture, and that makes it very tough, because even if you really understood your problem, you need to know what machine you want to run on. And of course, you can't know that. So what you need to have is a structure that makes it easy to change these things based on where you're running that day. And we have it, but knowing what to change to relies on looking at the logs a little bit and knowing some basic facts. And I think our paper does a fairly good job of laying out a few simple rules for looking at the logs and making decisions about how the machine looks.
So Matt, we have a question on what's the maximum number of processors we can use.
Okay, I can see it now. So there is no maximum is the best answer. As you increase the number of processes, the current bottleneck will change. So things that are unimportant on 2 processes can become a bottleneck on 1,000 processes or 10,000. So there's no limit to what our code can run on because we're memory scalable. But for instance, one part you could say is that the initial mesh is right now read in on a single node. So if the mesh you want to use is too large, you'd be in trouble. Although that mesh would have to be awfully large. And our solution to this has been we're going to keep the unstructured part small enough to fit on a node, which still one node could easily do 1 billion cells. It's what you want is to regularly refine after that if you really need the accuracy, and Brad showed that. So filling up any of the machines today, I don't see problems on any of the larger machines like, 50,000 nodes. If you want to run on absolutely all of Titan, 300,000 or 400,000 nodes, then the place that's going to fail first is your initial mesh, I think. But I don't know. How many nodes were you envisioning running on? Because I really don't see any problems with the solve itself or boundary conditions. That's all memory scalable. It comes down to, can you get your initial mesh in? Okay, so here's another problem. So FEM modeling is time consuming, I guess, compared to what? It has capabilities, and I would say the nice thing about finite elements is that it is quite scalable. You can solve very big problems, and you can solve very heterogeneous problems very accurately. So when you go to another option, like say you go to Relax, you really trade off accuracy. And I don't think that Relax can do the kind of fault constitutive law modeling that you can do, and that to me is also an accuracy issue. It's model accuracy. Compared to analytic modeling, of course, you can handle much more general scenarios. And I guess I would say this. To me, finite element modeling is the only thing that can legitimately approach real-world scenarios. You can take in data from actual measurements and look at the consequences of your model given that data. You can't do that with analytics, and you can't do it with any semi-analytical technique that I know of either. If you really would like to have georeference models that incorporate a lot of data, finite element is sort of a shorthand for these discretized models. So it could be finite elements or finite volumes or something like that. But I don't see an alternative right now if you want to do computational modeling of that sort. Brad, do you agree with me, or what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the point is, I think, sort of what are the alternatives? For quasi-static modeling, if you don't have any information about your elastic structure, so you're going to be using a homogeneous half space, then yeah, you should be using Relax. But if you have information about what your spatial variation of your physical properties are, and they're influencing your solution, then in terms of accurately capturing those effects, you're going to need to use something that can handle those vital variations, and your semi-analytic methods aren't going to work. If you're thinking more about, and then there's also the issue, as Matt pointed out, of the fault constitutive model. That's having nonlinear problem, and so you need a code that can be able to handle that. There aren't many, especially on the quasi-static side, there aren't very many community open source documented codes that run in parallel, if any, that have similar attributes to Pilot. If you're looking at sort of the wave propagation, then there's a lot more choices. Finite difference approaches often are going to use sort of, they may scale very well, but you may be wasting a lot of time with fine discretization down deep in your model at fine time steps that you don't need. You're probably throwing away topography. You know, SpecFem Regional and the SpecFem Globe are great codes that scale really well, but their fault friction capabilities are somewhat limited and sort of on the research side of things. I don't think they're in the mainstream release. I think they're still off in sort of the development repository. And so, you know, you sort of find the code that can do what you want to do based on your observations and the constraints that you have. So we have another question here.
Boundary conditions.
Boundary conditions. So a fixed versus roller. So essentially, if you don't have any deformation at your boundary, then you have sort of either a 2D problem or a 3D problem, you really only need to constrain your deformation that's normal to the boundary. That constrains your problem well enough, and without enforcing sort of artificially additional constraints. If you're trying to deform your mesh or you're trying to drive deformation from using your boundary, then that's sort of a different case where you really need to figure out what is constrained in your boundary. Do you need to add in compression as well as lateral motion? So, you know, it's basically you want to impose as few boundary conditions as possible that's consistent with that, and you don't want to over-constrain your boundaries. So usually you constrain the perpendicular, the degree of freedom normal to the boundary, and that's it. And a lot of our 3D hexade examples, because our fault goes all the way through the edge, our model, we're using just we're constraining X and Y degrees of freedom on the X plus X and minus X spaces. If you look at our sort of more 3D or our 2D problems where we didn't have a three-line fault, we're constraining just the normal displacements, and in most of our sort of examples like that we have our benchmarks, we're constraining just the deformation normal to the boundary. Getting back to sort of what codes to use in fine elements, obviously another issue to mention is in finite difference codes, you don't worry about generating your mesh. It's very, very simple. Fine element models, if you want to honor a complex non-planar fault surface, you're going to have to spend some time meshing. Qubits certainly get you a long way, and with the tools that we've been working on in terms of taking qubit, adding in discretization size information using fields, that's certainly gotten a lot easier. The computer is still going to work pretty hard if you have really a complex fault network. There aren't many sort of methods for discretizing that, and so you're pretty much, it's going to take some time. Usually I allow about a month for meshing an extremely complex geometry. In some cases, I've been able to cut it down to a week or so if I'm really sort of set up, but that's taken several years to do that. If you're starting out, you saw that, it's pretty easy to get going non-planar in 2D and very simple non-planar in 3D. In the examples Charles showed. But that's definitely sort of I would say the 3D non-planar fault geometry, you're very limited in terms of the number of the different codes that you can use, especially when we go into fault constitutive modeling. And any mesh generation, no matter which code you're going to use, is probably going to take a fair amount of time. Any other questions? Final call for questions.
Yep.